Hello and welcome to today's interview with VOW COO Ellen Dinsmore. As most of you know, Kate's passionate about helping founders and startups to create value from their equity. And one of the best ways to learn is to get industry leaders on to share their experiences so that we can learn from both their successes and their more hard-earned lessons. Welcome, Ellen.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the time, Jason.
And so VOW seems to be going from strength to strength, recently announcing a Series A. So congratulations on that. And I saw you were previously at Lemonade as well. We've been admirers of Lemonade for some time. Incredible work with UX and branding in the insurance space.
Yeah. No, awesome. It's glad to hear that. I know because Lemonade isn't live over here. It's maybe not as well known, but yeah, it still has a soft spot in my heart. I loved working there, and I'm still very close with a lot of my colleagues from those days.
Yeah, very cool as a fintech, really trying to improve the UX and be very product led. So yeah, it was quite inspirational for us. So it was nice to see that there. I'm sure you learned a lot.
Yeah.
But VOW now, and super exciting startup. Maybe we can kick off just talking a little bit about what a day in the life of a COO, at a fast growing company is like.
Yeah, sure thing. So maybe I'll just give you the one or two liner actually on VOW, and then I can touch on how I fit within that. Especially because what we do is a bit unique. So
It sure is.
So VOW is among a handful of cultured meat startups around the world. And these are companies that are actively working to grow real cells from animals and grow those cells and then craft them into actual food products. So I think many consumers out there are familiar with other forms of alternative proteins. So imagine something like V2 or Fable. The majority of what's out there, though, is created from plant-based ingredients. And we're really focused on making actual meat, but in a way that's much more sustainable for the environment. So our office and kind of facility here at VOW looks a lot more like a brewery, where we're growing those cells in what looks almost like the distillery vats you'd see in a brewery setting, and then we can craft those into actual meat products. And so what makes VOW a bit unique, though, is we work with any type of cell out there. We're not trying to just recreate what exists today, but we think this is really, really cool technology that you could use to make many different types of meat, some of which are maybe more nutritious or delicious even than what exists today. So that's kind of the short and sweet on us. Now, as to what being a COO at this sort of company looks like, it's a glorious hodgepodge of many different things. And that's why I love it. So technically within the ops umbrella, my day-to-day ranges from finance to all things people, to this group we call BizOps, which is kind of a glorified SWAT squad of a lot of ex-consultants and engineers. And that's what I did a lot of at Lemonade. And then we also have the early days of our reg function within ops as well. But as COO, I get to dabble in a little bit of everywhere, especially these days because George is quite busy with fundraising investors. And it seems like at least once a month is flying to some remote corner of the globe. I get to kind of lean in and sink my teeth into whatever's really important. So whether that's building out a manufacturing line and working with those teams, or thinking about future products, I get to dabble in a lot of those different places.
Oh, sounds like a wonderfully exciting company and role. I'm sure there's never a dull moment, especially with George flying all around the world. So yeah, really, really cool. Really cool. And so announced an incredible round recently to keep the company sort of flying ahead. Congratulations on that. Having one of Australia's best investors, by far Blackbird on your team must be really exciting. How we put together a round like that and getting it over the line is obviously incredibly interesting for anyone in the Australian ecosystem. Would you be able to share a little bit of insight into how that all came about and so interesting.
Yeah, I think so. I will say, I think we were really fortunate with how all of that panned out. There were a lot of great companies that went out to fundraise around similar timing to we did. We started the process in Q2 of 2022, which was right when the market started to tank. With that being said, I also think it forced us to think really critically about our strategy and how we articulated that. And frankly, think really critically about what type of investors we wanted, and to really be thoughtful in terms of investing the time and building those relationships with those who were still interested in kind of weather the stormy tides with us a bit. I think one approach to fundraising that George and I have definitely kind of taken to heart at this point is actually less of an idea of, oh, we have these specific goals to hit before we fundraise. We kind of operate it from this perspective of, we run as fast as we can day to day. And then we kind of try to decouple that almost from day-to-day operations. We've noticed in particular, if you bring your team along that up and down journey of fundraising, it can frankly be really distracting for them. And people tend to do their best work when you just have these really clear goals as a company of, hey, you got to build a manufacturing line in 2 months. Cool. And then everyone can really rally around that. And it ends up being a huge part of the fundraising story. But when you kind of separate the two, it makes it easier for your entire team to kind of run towards that. And then George and I can kind of take things on the side and keep sharing the amazing progress we're making with investors. So I do think what was helpful for Vow in this specific fundraise as well is that we have a different approach, which I touched on, than many other companies out there. Pretty much everyone else is trying to recreate a chicken nugget or a beef burger. And they're competing against existing meat companies when it comes to cost and taste and all the things that you and I or anyone else who's had meat would know if you're biting into. And so I think when you play in that space, it's much more of a game around what's your path to profitability? How are you going to make money really quickly? Whereas I think we just have this fundamentally different strategy and vision, which is inherently also longer term. And so I think in that sense, we're not also an investment that you make looking to make money in 2 years. And so I think there's this crop of investors, which is much more forward long-term thinking that we were able to tap into.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I've spent a bit of time with Blackbird and certainly comes through, you know, they're looking for those, you know, absolute game changers, you know, people that are really trying to shift the paradigm about what an industry or a product can be. And so, you know, incredibly insightful to hear that, and I suppose to see it, you know, actually happening. So I guess congrats to all of you for having such a big vision and really trying to tackle things in a unique way, and you know, and to the team at Blackbird for backing you as well, because you know, I'm sure it's pretty incredible to actually get these things done over the years.
Yeah.
So all right, cool. Well, look, thanks for that insight. You know, great to hear a little bit about that, and congratulations again. So look, the COO role, you know, it varies from company to company, depending on the different skill sets of the, you know, the executives and which other of those really senior people you're kind of missing when you're building your team. You can't have everybody all the time, you know, when you're building these teams, as we all know. One of your responsibilities, you know, is around the cap table. So we talked a little bit about that. So obviously at Cake, we're very passionate about making sure that, you know, the cap table's in good shape to help people raise. So yeah, would you maybe share some insights into, you know, the cap table management process at Vow, and you know, how that's actually helped you, you know, with your raise?
Yeah, the kind of short and sweet of that is the cap table that we use in Cake is our source of truth. And so that's our tool that we use on a day-to-day basis to update it as we're adding new employees to Vow. So also right now at Vow, every person who joins our company receives an option grant. So we firmly believe that everyone who's on our team should be an owner. So because of that, we need a tool like Cake where you can have it very dynamically update the vesting ongoing, because at any point in time for the fundraising process, you're going to have an investor reach out and say, well, what's the cap table look like today? And what's the exact amount of shares that have vested even within your ESOP pool? And so Cake becomes a very easy one-stop shop where we can go, and because we have the day-to-day processes in place where that's updated, then we can very easily go and download what the cap table looks like. Again, it's less dynamic, I would say, from an investor perspective, because that doesn't change as frequently. But I would say particularly when it comes to managing our employee ESOP, because that is quite dynamic, having that centralized is really quite useful.
Yeah, I remember back when we had the spreadsheet version before we had Cake, and whenever you needed it, you'd have to go and see which version was right, and you'd be your accountant, and you'd have your current one, you'd be reconciling. You know, it was such a pain in the butt. And I'm with you now whenever I need it. And it's in the funniest times as well. Like we sort of had our round all done, and then a little bit opened up, and then someone came in to take out the end of our round, and then I had to give them a cap table, and I just said to Charlie, our COO, and he was able to instantly give me, you know, the exact cap table to send over, and you know, it just makes life so much easier. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, that's true. Time is of the essence with a lot of those requests. Like we had an internal rule that we would respond to any diligence request within 24 hours. And so when that's the baseline for a turnaround time, if not faster, being able to quickly download something versus refresh it and recalculate it and reconcile things that are off is huge.
especially in your role with all those different departments and functions that you're trying to look after. If you have to spend a few hours reconciling a cap table, you're going to be in all sorts. So, that's really incredible insight. Thank you. Thank you. And I suppose, would there be one or two things that you would recommend, founders or, COOs or finance managers? You talked before about, I guess, sort of not necessarily having total ownership of the cap table now, but participating on that with your sort of finance lead. Would there be any tips or things that you've learned about your cap table that you could, impart or share with the listeners?
Yeah, the one thing that comes to mind immediately is to build a process around it, no matter how simple it is, and then to make sure you stay on top of keeping it updated. Where we have hit some bumps in the road is if maybe because we onboarded someone new or someone left or roles changed internally, there wasn't a clear owner, there wasn't a clear process, then even in 2 months, if you hire a couple of people, you kind of get in this backlog where then it takes a lot of time to go in and update and reconcile and make sure that everything is up to date. And then you can't respond to those diligence requests that you get as quickly because you have to double check the validity of where the cap table stands at a given point in time. So it's one of those things where investing 10 to 20 minutes to say who owns this, who owns what parts, if they're out of office, who steps in, and then how frequently do they need to update it? Could just be like once a fortnight, but having that level of process around it smooths out the entire experience so much more than kind of waiting until it becomes something on fire.
You just reminded me of two of the most important things. One, have a great COO. Oh my God, I love how COOs think. They're the most valuable people. It's just incredible for someone like myself to have someone, that's just keeping all these things under control. The second one, I guess, was around, just keeping things up to date. I think, in those first couple of rounds, it can be easy for, it's very hard to keep your cap table up to date. I'm biased, but I know Cake helps tremendously. But, quite often it's the founder doing everything. And then you might have like one person kind of helping you, but you may not want to delegate it because it's kind of important. And you're constantly carrying kind of like cap table stress as well. And that like grates on you to the point where your kind of cap table collapses maybe around your seed round or whatever. And then you have to rebuild the whole thing. So I think the less you can, the more you can minimize that sort of baggage, the better.
Yeah. The other thing I would say that, and this was personally something I didn't know prior to doing this role here, and I can't say to what extent these roles vary country by country, but at least in Australia, there are a lot of strict regulatory requirements around granting ESOP and even some of the vesting around that. So like one example of a law that I had no idea existed until, not going to say how recent, but it basically within a 12-month period, you're only allowed to grant a certain number of option kind of grants to new employees. There's workarounds for that. You can get kind of special permissions and approvals from the government, which we're in the process of now. Those rules were put in place, I think, a while back with good intentions, but they do make it harder for a startup that's growing pretty quickly to grant those offers when people join. And so using a tool again like Cake, it becomes much easier for me to see, okay, well, how many grants did we make in the last 6 months? Are we getting close to a point where we have to report something? Do we need to go and get different regulatory compliance approvals for something? And so you can also just keep notes on that in a system like Cake, which is helpful. So again, especially for someone like myself who doesn't know all the ins and outs of Australian tax rules or whatever they look like, having somewhere where you can keep notes and reminders on this and then use to make sure you're ensuring compliance is also just a huge tool for having peace of mind.
Yeah, I love that. I remember early on, we really wanted to have triggers and reminders and stuff like that in the system. But as we went to multiple countries, it just became like an infinite issue. But as you say, the notes function really does perform a good feature because you can download that and still sort of maintain those internal controls, as a company. So yeah, very good insight. All right. And then we're super passionate about employee ownership. I know you are as well. You've already said everybody gets equity. Obviously, that's the same at Cake. We really believe in employee equity as, helps you attract talent, engage, retain talent, and sharing in the success of the company is a really wonderful thing to be able to do if you go on and have a huge valuation like Val already does, and I'm sure it's going up. So I guess on the employee ownership side of things, do you want to talk a little bit to how employee ownership plays a role in growing your business?
Yeah, so it is something that myself and a number of others feel pretty strongly about. And I think that's frankly because we have a few people on our team who've been at other startups before. And we know that something that feels very ambiguous and just feels like, oh, does that even matter? What could it be? We've actually seen that come to life. And whether or not that comes to life in a life-changing way, it still becomes real. And you realize that that work you and your team put in can manifest in a very real way. And so when it comes to, I'll speak a bit to kind of how we try and talk about equity within the company and some things we do in that sense. But then I'll talk about maybe a bit of our approach as to how we actually try and determine what to grant, because we try and use actually a pretty formulaic approach to make that as fair as possible across the board.
Yeah, that's two of the most important things that we talk to our customers about and that they ask us about. The first one is like, okay, so we've done the legal component, and the team member knows how many options they've got, but how do I help them understand what it's worth, and if we're successful, what it can be worth? And that element is super important. I sort of see it in two ways, and tell me what you think. So there's the financial element, but there's also the cultural element, that we're all in this together, and we can all share in the success of the company. I guess just adding in, so specifically around building value sort of day to day in the culture, and then working towards like the liquidity events and things like that.
Yeah. So from the time someone is even considering joining Vow, we try and explain and articulate equity as clearly as possible. Because what I think myself and others have observed across the board is where this falls through the cracks is when people don't understand what it is, and they don't even know the right questions to ask to understand it, right? And so, for instance, if you tomorrow were to interview for a job for Vow, and we were to make you an offer, we'd say, here's your base salary, we'd say, here's your starting option grant, and we actually share with you something that we call our equity calculator tool, where we'd say, here's the value of that grant today, here's potential valuations or exit options in the future. Oh, and FYI, here's companies that are at that stage now, or here's ones that exited at that point, so that it makes it a bit more real. So, we could say, okay, well, if we're a $2 billion company, hey, this company Beyond that sells plant-based, they're 2 billion right now. This is what it looks like. So
have you been talking to our product team? Because like, that's literally what we just built as a feature in Kate. Have you seen it yet?
No.
It just got released this month. So when you want to send an offer out to your team member, you can put their salary in, put their equity in, and then you can put like a different multiple, some different multiples. We haven't got the comparative companies in the market, but someone just mentioned that to me today as a good product enhancement. So we must do that, because that's twice in one day now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason we find it helpful is essentially you kind of have to say, okay, could you see Vow being at that size and stage?
Yeah, it's got to be real, right? Otherwise, it's like mumbo jumbo numbers, especially if you're not financially minded. You're like, oh, okay, it might as well be $1 gajillion. Like, it's very hard to understand.
Exactly. And so then, assuming someone joins, we have an actual training we'll run internally where we explain what equity is, again, trying to articulate, here's how it works, here's what you need to know about it, here's what you maybe don't need to worry about today, that sort of thing. And then as part of our annual performance review process, whenever you go through that, you end up with a rating which affects your compensation. And as part of that can also affect and lead to an equity refresh. So kind of making sure, especially for our top performers, that that's part of the conversation. We want them to have that constant opportunity to re-up and re-engage and have that sense of ownership with the company.
Yeah, so important. I remember, I'm sorry to jump in, but I remember we had a team member start recently, and obviously, we're pretty passionate about this. We're constantly improving and iterating our communication, and so we'd onboarded the team member, and we hadn't quite onboarded her. We'd sort of sent her the offer, and she was still unsure whether we were deducting the equity from her salary, and we couldn't have been. We tried so hard, and so I guess what I'm trying to stress is communicate often, as you say, maybe sit them down and talk them through it, let them ask all their silly questions, because it can be so foreign, almost everything that you're saying to them. And I'm not trying to belittle people at all either, but it just is important to take that time and make sure that they're across it.
Yeah. And especially, to be honest, I've noticed a pretty big difference in terms of education around equity in Australia versus the US.
Yeah.
I think the US has had a larger startup scene for a while. I think, frankly, it's seen more startups that have a really successful exit. Definitely. And so there's more people floating around that are able to speak to, hey, here's what this meant and here's what it looks like. And I've noticed that to be a bit more nascent in Australia. And I think it's just because there's fewer companies. Even some of the startups I've talked to don't issue equity to all employees, even at an early stage. So I think there's just the fundamental lack of understanding affects therefore how much employees engage with and really kind of lean into the ownership that they can have.
Awesome. No, I totally agree. I totally agree. So I cut you off before. Please continue.
The other thing I was going to mention is actually a bit of our approach to how we calculate that, which I don't know if it's perfect, and I would love to know how other companies look at this. And in particular, the one where we find it's like the absolute wild, wild west, frankly, is when you're looking to bring on anyone who's more of an executive. You can Google this and find ranges all over the shop in terms of how much equity someone gets at different stages. But for the overwhelming majority of our employees, what we try to do is essentially say, you're going to receive a grant that is a certain percent of your starting salary. So let's say, just for round numbers sake, let's say we would say something like, okay, your new hire grant is going to have the value today of roughly 10% of your starting salary. And so if you, Jason, made 100K, I'd say, cool, your starting new hire grant is going to be valued at roughly 10,000. And then using the value of our options, we can back into how many options that means today. So again, those are rough numbers just to give you a sense of it, but it's that sort of formula so that you can be quite consistent. And again, it should, I think, correspond with comp and seniority and all these other things. But then it
might have like 10%, but then if you're ahead, you might get 15%. If you're a C-level, you might get, more. And so everybody knows as they progress and add value and seniority that they can earn more and more over time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, awesome. And you would normally issue that over what, a 3 or 4 year period, using 3 or 4 years for vesting?
We actually have a 5-year vesting schedule, which I've only found 1 or 2 other companies that do that. The original thinking behind that from our founders was that the nature of VOW is being a deep tech company. It just has a much longer runway, frankly.
100%.
And so therefore we wanted the longer vesting timeline.
100%. If you get, especially with the investors, I feel like, you're trying to align to the investors' horizon as well. And deep tech has a longer investment horizon. So much of your IP is in your people early on as well. So you want to keep them with the company as long as you can. Awesome. Well, look, that was some incredible insights. Was there anything on the employee ownership side of things that you wanted to add that we didn't cover?
No, I think that's it for me, probably, on that side.
Nailed it. Perfect. So I'm going to finish with a question around a topic that's sort of like really important to us at Cake. We call it creative, healthy lifestyle. It's sort of what we call our work-life balance, or how we keep our team and our culture really energized, so that we can tackle the huge challenges that we need to tackle. I presume, you're doing so many hard things there at VOW. Is there anything that you can talk to that you have, at VOW that helps your team empowered, whether it be from a, mental health or physical health or work-life balance? We're super intrigued to hear what other great companies do.
Yeah. So I'll speak to 2 things. One of which is more personal, and then one which the ops team does, which I think touches on some of the themes that you mentioned. I'll start with that one. So once a month, the ops team has what we call a fireside chat. And this is a retro of sorts, but it's very much focused on how we're feeling at a personal level. What I notice with a lot of teams, especially maybe a really great product team, is, after a sprint, they'll run a retro, but it's all about, well, how did this feature go? How did that release go? And it's less focused on the individuals. And so I wanted to carve out space for this at least once a month, where we all step back as a team. And each month we answer a similar list of questions, maybe with some nuances, but they're often focused around, how are you feeling in terms of learning and development? How are you feeling in terms of workload and sustainability? How are you feeling about our team and VOW? Questions and thoughts do you have? And then we always end with, what's one thing we should keep doing as a team, and what's one thing we should do differently? And
I love that.
I find
that being heard is so important in that human connectivity. Quite often there isn't even big actions off the back of discussions like that, is there? It's just, hey, we've had some space and, we're feeling connected, and there probably is a few actions as well, but it's not always about the actions. I find it, that sounds like a really awesome idea.
Yeah, it's definitely about the space. I will say the team has come up with some fabulous ideas, and some of the ways in which we work best now come from those discussions. Or we just get to know one another a bit more as humans and understand, hey, that person's a bit tired because, they have an 8-month-old at home, and okay, how can we help them with that? Whatever it is, you just want to support people on a human level. The other thing and this one is very personal to me. joke with my team from day one, but it's true. I have very much what I call a Swiss cheese working style. I am not someone who's—
Haven't heard that one before.
I know, it's just different. I'm not good at sitting still for that long.
I have heard that one before.
Yeah. In general, I find that I try to have a level of self-awareness around whether or not I'm being productive and being efficient. And if I'm not going to glue my butt to a seat and force it to happen. And so I try to encourage that with my team as well. But it's not uncommon for me to pop out and take a walk for an hour in the afternoon. Or it's not uncommon for me to work from home till 10 and then commute in because I kind of hit a roadblock and need a bit of time and space. And so I try and encourage people to have a degree of fluidity in their schedule that flexes around what allows them to do their best work. Now, I know this isn't always available. Like we have some folks, for instance, on our manufacturing line where it's like, no, there's actually just set hours. And so I know I'm saying some of this from a bit of a privileged space where it's, I have the ability to have the Swiss cheese sort of mobility. But I think when you have that kind of having the self-awareness to work in the way that allows you to do your best and still get things done is a really kind of cool thing to be able to take advantage of in the ways we work today.
100% in the ways we work today. And one of the advantages of working for, for a progressive, tech company, you have to be aware of these things. I know for me, when I'm moving, I get extra creative. So a bit like you, if I'm stuck or if I'm, I just know if I'm moving, I'm going to probably, get some energy. And so I'm always trying to create opportunities to move. Might be undiagnosed ADHD, but anyway, we make the most of it. So look, I really value your time. We're so grateful to have you. Val is doing so well, and I'm sure, you're a big part of that. So congratulations. Thank you so much for being a great customer of Cakes and for taking the time to, to share your insights with us today. And yeah, we will get this all up and about for everybody soon. Thank you, Ellen.
Oh, sounds good. Thank you, Jason.
Bye.